You're listening to Remotely One, a podcast that educates, entertains, and inspires you to take your life back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a former beer rep who left the warehouse to become a voice actor and digital creator.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds awesome. Let's clock in.
Excuse me, I just put eye drops in, and that's a private moment.
Yeah.
Not so much, apparently.
It's a moment in the same vein of, I believe, flossing. We've talked about this on shows before, that there's certain things you should do in the private of your own home. And I believe, eye drops are one of those. But
okay.
I'm
Understood.
How about you? What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think it's totally private. It reminds me of my second job out of college. I had a boss who used to trim his nails in the office, which was like, oh my God, like awful. Wow. And I found like people remote though are still like doing things that you don't realize. Like, I can still hear you.
Tell us his name. Tell us his name.
I can't. He won't name my name.
Mark, Matt, Jane, you're disgusted for clipping your damn toenails. Ew, toenails too. Holy shit. Oh,
yeah, it's real story.
Yeah. Welcome back to Remotely One. I am Rick. He is Kaleem. Hey, buddy.
I'm going to fly away because of today's guest. Fly. Yes. We're flying.
Yes. We are excited for today's show. I can tell you that much. There's so much I want to dive into. So many questions. So much ground to cover.
Yeah.
Are you as geeked up as I am?
Yes. Our guest is so intimidating. I just don't even know what we're going to do with this guest because I'm so nervous. Oh. So nerved up, dude.
My heart is gonna flutter. Woo! Hey, everybody. Since you know how to find us, do us a huge favor. Go to ratethispodcast.com/remotely one and just leave us a review. We'd be so thankful if you could do that for us. Since 2015, Remotely One is one of the largest communities of remote work professionals with over 2,800 Slack members and 4,000 email subscribers. That's amazing.
4,000?
It's always free to join. So go check it out at remotely1.com. With that, give us a teaser too, Kaleem.
Well, no problem, Rick. My name is Kaleem.
I said Kaleem. Stella! I interjected. I'm stumbling because I'm nervous. I haven't been this nervous in a while.
It's okay, man. And you know what, Stella, leave this in, bro. And all the listeners and viewers, our editor's name is Stella, and he's dope. Don't try to steal him. So anyway, our guest today, Rick, I'm going to see if I can get through it without stuttering. I love to stutter, though. Our guest today,
you do.
She's from Rochester, New York.
Snickerdoodle. Oh, that's Wisconsin.
She is now a Floridian who lives in Orlando. She has not one, not two, but 3 different degrees. We call that the trifecta in education. She's got a bachelor's, a master's, and her PhD in organizational leadership. No big deal.
Oh, man, that's all like smart, y'all.
Okay. She's also worked at one of the big 4, I believe. She was the lead researcher at Deloitte at one time. She is an author. She wrote a book in 2018 called How Behavioral Economics Influences Management Decision-Making. So we have to ask her about that. You know what? She's an adrenaline junkie. She loves thrill rides, which is why she picked Orlando, bro. Makes sense. It makes sense.
Gotta make that happen.
Let's see. This is just going through this list. It's just crazy. In 2019, before remote work was real cool, she gave a TEDx talk on the future of work. So we got to talk to her about that. She was also a global lead researcher at another small consulting firm. They're just a small firm, Accenture. No big deal.
Oh,
no big deal. Guest, how many publications have you been in? Just name a couple.
You're asking me now?
Yeah.
All right, ready to jump in. All right, listen, last week, super excited, Harvard Business Review had a publication, HBR.
Okay.
That's been on the, kind of like that dream list. So we did that.
What else you got?
MIT SMR, Sloan Management Review.
She's bragging now. She's bragging. We asked her to brag now. We asked her to brag.
All right. No imposter syndrome here, all right? And then for the academic side, Journal of Strategic Management. Not sure that's on, too many people's coffee tables, but, got to keep those academic credentials alive. Yeah.
That's a big one. Rick.
Impressive.
She was also the director of the future of work at Meta, aka Facebook, just in case y'all didn't know that yet.
That's big time.
Yep. She's now the manager director of the Research Institute at Upwork. Okay.
Love Upwork.
Oh my gosh. Listeners and viewers, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Kelly Monahan. Woo!
Yeah!
Let's go, Dr. Monahan! Yes! Woo!
How do you feel now, Dr. Monahan?
Man, I need to hire you two to be my hype men. Before I get on stage for a presentation, I'm like, break these two out.
I'm telling you.
We will be there.
We will be there. Your next TEDx talk.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, baby.
We will light that crowd on fire.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for reaching out. I was super excited.
Cool. Wow.
I can speak for the both of us when I say I am super excited to ask the questions, but I know we got a lot of ground to cover.
Okay.
Your TED Talk, for me, it resonated on so many different points. So many questions I have, but really where I want to start is in your TED Talk, you mentioned a guy that not a lot of people remember named Henry Ford. Okay. He said, I don't want hearts and minds. I need hands. Okay.
Yep.
That to me is just, it's a huge statement, but what stuck out to me was the fact that it's stuck around for so long, and we're finally at a point now where we're moving away from that. But my question is, what the hell took us so long? Right?
It's a great question.
What was it that forced people into starting to rethink about the importance of culture and being engaged at work?
Yes. That is a great first question. And I love that we're just having this in an organic way too. So, it comes top of mind. So the listeners know this is not pre-prepped or anything. We're in the moment.
Right.
Yes, I love that. So that's a great question. So I have a couple of thoughts to that. The first is mindsets are so hard to change with people. Once we become ingrained in a enormous set, and especially when it comes to business, I think so much of how we've defined success, especially in corporations and as Americans, has revolved around that corner office, rising up the hierarchical chain. And so once you get to that point, it's really hard as a leader to rewrite the rules of work, of how success is formed. And in many ways, you feel like you've earned your stripes and badges to earn that way. And you want other people to work the same way and have that same model of success. So decade after decade, we've really created, I think, a faux sense of success within organizations, which is I rise by having you do either trampling on you or having you do less. My success is very much in competition to others. And I think, there's been even another TED Talk by this wonderful woman who talks about super chickens. You put a bunch of high performers together, they end up pecking each other to death. You put together a bunch of mediocre performers and they tend to actually all rise together. And so I think we're actually at a crossroad. I'm cautiously optimistic. We're beginning to rewrite the rules of management and leadership and what performance looks like within organizations. But we're still very much hardwired to butts and seats, long hours, quantity over quality. And I need to rise up the hierarchical chain to feel success and feel successful, and giving up that corner office. Obviously, we're here to talk about remote work. I think is part of the reason why it's been so hard is it's a status symbol. And it's harder to see that in remote environments in particular. It's been a great equalizer in many ways.
So just bouncing off that TED Talk, it was fabulous, by the way. I listened to it this morning, preparing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I won't date stamp this. We're not date stamping. But what is it that you found that made some people so engaged and passionate at work versus others? That's human behavior at work that you talk about, right? What is it that you found over time with your research that keeps people really engaged and passionate?
Yeah. So a couple of things, and it's funny because I think there's this like whole notion is, especially, being an elder millennial myself, we're like, oh, you could be anything you want, go pursue your passions, it'll all work out. And I think that's actually can have been some pretty dangerous advice for a lot of people. So I do think being engaged in work is, yes, about finding a passion, but there's other things, because I think about, I've got, as you mentioned, family in Rochester, New York. And so I had an uncle who worked at Walmart and was stocking shelves every day. And so I also think about him and thinking about, well, how do we create meaningful work? Because yeah, it's easy. I've been at Accenture and Deloitte and Meta. These are pretty luxury jobs where you get to work on cool projects, but that's really the minority, not the majority of Americans today. And so I try to think through, what are the attributes that you can have, even if your pay is not going to be at a high tech company, even if you're not going to be working on like sexy VR, virtual reality type projects, how do you still make work meaningful? And so there are a couple of things in the research I found that are essential, no matter if you're a janitor or a CEO at an organization. Right off the bat, you need to have a sense of belonging, community. Like, we're social beings. We tend to be pack-like creatures. And so we have to figure out within our organizations, who's our community, who's our work friend, who are we in the trenches with day in and day out. And I think this could be a caution here is, as we think about diversity and inclusion, sometimes we form such in-groups with people at work and we create very, let's just be honest, straight white male cultures that at times has ostracized a lot of people. But in theory, we need to have a community and social sense of belonging, and we want to be in the trenches with people, regardless of what that activity is. The second thing is, we also are, as much as Henry Ford liked to say that we were lazy, I actually think a lot of times we are wired for intellectual curiosity and creativity. And for a lot of reasons, it's kind of stripped out of us by the time we reach adulthood. And so I think creating some sort of challenge within jobs, some sort of intellectual stimulation, I think is absolutely essential today. And so when we're able to combine the intellectual stimulation, being able to do that in a group, really the task itself, I found in many ways becomes irrelevant. It's less about the task and more about how you're doing it and who you're doing it with.
So purpose and community.
Yes, exactly. It comes down to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to interject, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, and I say a lot of people, what I really mean is myself, work has become
the most important person.
Right. The biggest audience.
Just me, myself, and I. Just me, myself, and I.
So anyway, work has become a lot of people's identity. Their ego gets intertwined with what they do, and they take that on as their persona, so to speak.
Yep.
I use myself as an example. I've been in the beer industry for 2 decades now. I've done everything there is to do in the beer business. I've made it. I've stocked shelves. I've delivered it. I've built draft systems. I've basically done everything. And I remember a couple of months ago, I'd come home from a long day at work. I was miserable because I really didn't like my boss, and I didn't really have a passion for what I was doing. And I was drinking a beer after work, just watching mindless television. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't even like this shit. Why am I drinking it, let alone being in the business, right? And it was like an aha moment. So
yes,
getting back to my point, I'm one of the lucky ones who just kind of had that aha moment, like, oh man, this is not what I'm meant to be doing. And that was when I really started to change. So my question for you is, was there an experience or something that happened to you in your life going back to when you first became a professional? What was it that ignited your passion for remote work and kind of breaking away from the norm?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm dying to also have an offline conversation with you on beers, knowing which I'm a big Pilsner lager. So, and what if I'm drinking the right beer? But we'll save that. I was like, I mean, I'm 100% Irish, so it comes with the territory.
Well, you know how it goes.
Yes, exactly. I love it. But no, I actually had a very life-changing moment that completely altered the way I think about work and my career choices. So I got into HR because, that's what people do who want to save the world and develop leaders, and motivate the next generation of workers. Meanwhile, that is definitely not what HR is actually about behind the scenes. It's much more about making sure you're handling a lot of the company leadership drama, I would say, and trying to be a buffer to that in the workforce. But
you're covering the company's ass.
And correct, exactly. So I mean, I'm so torn with HR because obviously that's typically my audience. But half the time, employees, I'm like, they're not there for you. They're there for the business. That doesn't make a secret people need to know about.
Yep.
But anyways, so I got into HR, thought I was going to change the world, develop leaders, engage employees. And my first assignment was to go lay off 200 people in one day.
Oh my God.
So this was back in the day, say when we still did layoffs in person. And yeah, look, 200 people, we did them individually. So it took a total of almost 10 hours. And one day, me and the CHRO of the company, and we went through and laid off 200 people and shut down an office. And the business decision was clear. It was a type of job that was being automated through robotic process automation. And then we were also outsourcing to a vendor. And then we were going to build up an office in Philadelphia, which is why I spent some time in Philly. And we're hiring a different skill set. So long story short, when you look 200 people in the eye, I was thinking like 26, 27 years old, I had my master's degree. I thought I knew everything and realized work is so much more than a paycheck. And that's where I started to see these elements of you're taking away my community. Rick, what you just said earlier, like you're taking away my identity. What am I going to go home and tell my family and friends? Like, who am I? Because this company, this office, most of the tenure, I think is about 22 years of tenure at this company. So most people were doing the same job day in and day out for 22 years. And it really rocked my world because I thought my idealism of what I thought what could be. And, we talked about before being this elder millennial, kind of being told you can be anything you want, you can do anything you want. It's just great social contract. Go work for a great company. They'll take care of you. I just saw it both being from Rochester and seeing Kodak, lose 46,000 people over the course of several years and what that did to that local economy. And I was at high school when that happened. So seeing, friends who had to move because their parents had lost their job and then having this assignment in HR, and doing that with 200 people and realizing the reaction people had. I mean, I had someone come in the next day saying, I need to close out my work. Like, you can't close down this office yet. I didn't finish my job. And just realizing you take that away from someone, it's devastating, regardless of how meaningless you think the task is. It's not to that particular individual. And so that changed everything, and which led me to go get my PhD and spend the rest of my career researching how do we actually make work for people. And hey, layoffs are going to happen. Automation's going to happen, but how do we get people better prepared? Because that was such a horrible experience where we blindsided too many people and we shouldn't have. So I thought there had to be a better way to do this.
Jeez, I mean,
wow, that's tough.
Where's the beer? I mean, telling that kind of story, we should be having beer right here with this.
Oh, pour me a pint of suds, laddie.
I totally forgot about Kodak when we were talking in the pre-show, and
yeah,
Kodak was based out of Rochester, is what you're saying. So I can't imagine, that talk about a company that pretty much dominated the space, and then innovation happened and all those jobs were changed. I mean, it obviously must have changed Rochester, I'm assuming.
Oh, completely. Completely.
What an experience to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, my personal experience, when I was in college, my fraternity was all engineers. And I remember when we graduated, half of my class went straight to Rochester. They already had jobs lined up. They were trained. They were ready to go. And I feel like the other half of us were kind of caught in this generational trap, right? Because we were the first generation that was taught to question everything. We were the first generation to address our feelings and our emotions, right? So the rest of us were just kind of standing around going, I don't want that. This is not what I'm signing up for, right? And we didn't choose careers. So we're kind of caught in the crossfire here of an old traditional mindset of our parents and our grandparents. And even though this was 25, 30 years ago, we saw the writing on the wall that traditional employment just didn't make sense anymore. And look how far we've come.
Yes.
So I have a question. So now you've had an HR job, you started doing some research, you had a chance working as a researcher with some of these consultancies.
Yep.
During kind of your time at Meta, you were the director of the future of work.
Yep.
The question I wanted to ask was, I remember while you were the director of the future of work, I recall there being an announcement from Meta that they were going all in on this remote, and they were going to be a remote first company, work from anywhere. They were just all in on this movement. And obviously you kind of slid into this really great role of being the director of future work there. How was that role described to you, like when you were interviewing?
Yep.
And what were some of the biggest challenges you were trying to solve in that role?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Going to Meta, I've been a big VR user for the last like 4 to 5 years. So I've got a good friend who's at Microsoft who bought me my first VR set like 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this thing? And then I got hooked. And so when I was talking with Meta about leaving, at the time I was with Accenture, and I think one of the hooks was, hey, we're building the actual future workplace. It's no longer going to be physical locations. What remote is missing is really that technological feel that makes it so much better than a simple Zoom call. And so being able to actually bring physical presence virtually is what really, and I still think they're, obviously well ahead of the game. Apple's now in the game too with their device they just released. And so I was really wanting to understand, how does human behavior change when we start showing up though? Not necessarily as a true human, because as we are today, but if we were to start showing up as avatars or human likeness in these digital environments, how would that maybe change the way we lead or work with each other? So that's why I went over there to start studying what that was going to look like within our internal employee population. But yeah, then the second thing was remote work, which was fascinating to me because I've been working remotely for a decade now, was new to Meta. And so they were very much in office culture based out of MPK. And we're trying to figure out, how do we infuse our culture in a sense of connection and kind of what makes us special as we become more distributed. And so it was simple things like, how do we work across time zones? How do we think about, we've got an office in San Fran, New York, London. How do we make that all come together for town halls and what's the right time zone? And so there was a lot of just tactical blocking of trying to figure out, how do we make this experience of remote work filled with less friction? Because you're taking a company that was so hardwired for in-office culture presence and then trying to make it remotely and still keep a sense of innovation and all of that. So it was a lot of working with their team to figure out what are the right policies, what's the right employee experience. And then, so I actually sat within their people analytics team, being a researcher, seeing the data, and then was also starting to study the VR and human behavior change we were seeing there as well.
Interesting. So while you were still at Facebook, I believe, or Meta, sorry, in July of 22, Facebook released their diversity report.
Yes.
And the diversity update report. And in that report, they exceeded all of their goals. And a lot of the success was attributed to remote work. For our listeners and viewers, basically, Meta put together their goals for improving diversity at their company. And then they actually reported a year or so later on their progress as far as diversity and inclusion. And in that report, they attributed a lot of their success to remote work. What are your thoughts about the correlation between remote work and inclusion and diversity?
Yes. So I was working on the research behind a lot of the statistics you just mentioned. And so remote work was a huge driver for Meta in particular for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mostly because when you have an in-office culture, and especially that's anchored in Silicon Valley, that is not the most inclusive environment, not the most inclusive schools, community, neighborhoods. And so it's very hard to relocate a variety of people to that location because they don't feel at home or they don't feel a sense of belonging in community. And so when you no longer are tethered to that particular environment, we were able to open up. We were having a lot of recruiting from Atlanta, from Florida, Miami. And so we were seeing a much more diverse candidate population who was willing to engage in work because they were able to stay within their community and not be uprooted from that. So I think that was the advantage. Now, the disadvantage that I think we still have to figure out how to do as a remote work community is, how do we make sure that those people, though, then aren't ostracized or not necessarily failing the same performance metrics? Like, we need to make sure that they're being able to keep up with the rest of the organization that does choose to come in office. And I still think that's a big challenge for many organizations of trying to balance, okay, we have this great diverse population, but are they really feeling a sense of belonging and inclusion? And are they getting promoted the same rates as the rest of the population, especially when they're remote? And then at times, we call this like the lonely and only. Like, if you were the only diverse person who was both diverse and remote on your team, that's not necessarily going to be the best experience. So how do you make sure and really think about even crafting teams from the get-go with a more diverse mindset?
Right. Yeah. Exposure to all of them.
Yeah, for sure. In your own words, What do you think was the motivation behind Meta requiring their employees coming back to the office?
Oh boy.
oh, hot take, hot
Where's my
take.
media training? Where's my media training? In my own words. Okay, in my own words, I'll tell you exactly what I think. And this isn't just to Meta. I think this is across the board for companies who are mandating return to office.
Well done.
It is
Well
so.
played.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of some PR training. So I think what it is it's really hard to lead people you've never met and to have, like, especially for early career professionals and people that you have a very particular culture and way of leading. It's really hard to do that in a remote environment. That takes a lot more on the leader than it necessarily even does the workforce, in my opinion, what I've seen in the research. And so we're asking leaders to do work differently. And the problem is we came upon this economic downturn, or at least a rise in inflation, and we saw some economic downturn occur at the exact same time that we were trying to make remote work and ask leaders to lead differently. So they're under even more pressure from investors in particular to continue this. I look at it from an intersection perspective.
Yes.
Investors at the same time are coming down very hard on these companies. You're losing share price, you're losing market share. At the same time, we're asking leaders to lead differently, to make more room for mental health conversations, to have more conversations around the pandemic at the time. We're trying to figure out what happens when people get COVID, and how much time do we give people off? Are you still paying people? There was all these new conversations that, quite frankly, were not happening before the pandemic as well. And so I think all of that pressure, it's a knee-jerk response that you're having. You know what? Let's go back to what we know was working before the pandemic, bringing people in. Our share price was where we want it to be. The problem is, I think it's very short-sighted, because what we just discussed is much more complex. And you're bringing together a different set of people under different circumstances and trying to recreate something that no longer exists. And so time will ultimately tell whether these experiments are working or not. But I truly believe, from what I've seen in the data, is the best talent wants flexibility, wants autonomy, and wants choice. And I think the best thing we can do is enable that. And those companies that are enabling that, I think in the long term, we'll see higher share price and all of that as they navigate the economic conditions. I also think it gives you a lot more agility as you think about a distributed workforce. I mean, you can obviously follow the sun. There's so much more that you can do from a work perspective, which obviously I'm preaching to the choir here. But yeah, I think that's the honest answer. I think it was a lot of investor pressure, economic downturn, plus a really new way to do leadership that just is causing knee-jerk reaction to get back to the office.
Wow, that
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's something that I don't think we've talked about on the show yet. And if we have, maybe I'm forgetting about it, but I don't really think too much about the pressure that leaders or even CEOs are facing from shareholders, and maybe even, VCs who are investors who might also have some financial investments in commercial real estate. I've never really thought of the pressure of your stakeholders, the internal stakeholders. Like, look, remote work was great, but we're losing a ton of money. We need to get back to the way we know makes money.
Correct. And it's coming from boards, board of directors. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in this research role having to provide remote work statistics up to board meetings to figure out, is remote, the number one question is, are remote workers productive? And so, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation of how are we defining productivity, but we won't even go there. So it's, are remote workers productive? How fast are they, onboarding? How fast are they making a contribution back to the company? And that was really top of mind. And again, it's just so complicated, because you think about board members, they were successful in a different era, a different way of working. And so I also think there's this huge pivot that needs to happen at the board level of how we actually capture the opportunities of remote work, because it's very much right now a risk adverse strategy as opposed to embracing this new way of working. It's trying to mitigate the risk out of remote work at that level is the lens they're using it.
Unbelievable. So I apologize, leaders. I apologize, CEOs who have cursed out plenty of times. I didn't think y'all had bosses too. I didn't think y'all had bosses too telling you, get them asses back in the seats. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Farmers Group. Not really.
We
not
didn't
really.
know.
We didn't know.
Well, right. And I mean, it is that's where I struggle, because obviously I am all about the workforce and bringing voice to the workforce.
Yes.
But then you do, the more you analyze it and you're like, yes, these people were making millions and millions of dollars. However, the tenure at the C-suite is getting shorter and shorter because boards are much more willing to churn.
Yes.
you're not doing it. So anyways, I think there's a lot more going on both sides of the equation. And so my whole goal as a researcher is to help serve as a translator and find the middle ground, because at the end of the day, I think that's where progress will happen.
Can't wait for the research paper that comes out on the influence boards have on remote work. It sounds great. Just saying.
Right.
I can't do
Run
it.
that research. Yeah, exactly.
Quick, before anyone else figures it out.
Exactly.
So earlier this year, as we all know, Salesforce decided to end the Slack Future Forum.
Yes.
Unfortunately, led by our esteemed colleague, Brian Elliott.
Shout out, Brian. Shout out, BE.
What's up, yo? And for those of our listeners or viewers that aren't familiar with it, the Slack Future Forum is a think tank of different companies that provided research and best practices on the future of work, and we're really sad to see that end. But you've just announced recently that Upwork is starting a research institute. So seeing what has gone on at the Slack Future Forum, what is the goal, and how has what happened with Slack's Future Forum affected what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah. Oh, listen, I was devastated when I saw that Salesforce was shutting down the Future Forum. I think they were providing such a needed voice through data and insights, the workforce sentiments towards remote work and what was changing. So I joined Upwork before we knew that was happening to start this research institute. But I think we were going to have a little bit of a longer term approach to taking this. But now we feel a much more stronger sense of urgency that there's an unmet need in the market when it comes to understanding new ways of working. So our entire heartbeat of this program is, how do we actually unlock new ways of working? And to do so requires new leadership behaviors. It requires a complete rework of the social contract that we have between employees and employers, and how is that manifesting itself, with pitfalls on both sides too. We're not having rosy glasses saying, hey, this new social contract is going to be great. We've got to help employees and employers and governments figure out how to rewrite the rules of work so that more people can participate. And then we're going to have a really big focus right now on technology and the intersection of skills and how that's influencing the workforce. So everyone's talking about generative AI. AI is certainly a big part of that equation, but as technology continues to change and disrupt workers, how do we help people get ahead of that curve, and even thinking about where's the training and development needed? So we are certainly, it is going to be really big shoes to fill, if we're honest. I mean, Brian is fantastic. Even though I listened to the episode and disagree with his sci-fi and more of Star Wars than Star Trek fan myself. So Brian, there you go.
Call back to our episode. That was the first one. She actually listened to the show.
I did. I'm a researcher.
Holy shit.
Do my homework.
Take
that's right.
Star Wars, son. Star Wars.
Well, listen, it's at Disney World. I got a whole Star Wars land down here,
Shots fired.
Shots fired. It has nothing to do with replacing the Slack Future Forum. Sci-fi.
We are going to have them both on the show for a quick 15-minute episode of Star Wars versus Star Trek. So listener and viewer, if you don't know what she's talking about, you have to go back and listen to the Brian Elliott episode. So we're not going to talk too much about that. But back to Upwork. This research institute sounds amazing. So people Google it, learn more about it. But I have a question about the gig economy.
Go for it.
How does the gig economy impact remote work? Because obviously it makes sense. Like, I've been to a lot of conferences and Upwork has been there, sending representatives to talk about some of the challenges. Where are you seeing that correlation between the two?
Oh, yes. Super excited. We have new research launching next week, actually, which I know we're not timestamping this, so I feel comfortable sharing some of this. We are finding a really strong correlation between companies who are embracing remote work and companies who are embracing both Gen AI and flexible work models. So it almost goes hand in hand in many ways. If you are okay with remote work, you are going to be okay bringing on a freelancer or contractor to engage in project work. You're going to be much more likely to embrace new technologies. It's like, I'm seeing in the data this almost like different mindset emerge about trusting in the workforce. Like, I think one of the questions in our survey we just launched that just continues to keep me up at night today is, we asked a question to business leaders. To what extent do you want to work with the best talent, regardless if they're a full-time worker, gig worker, contractor, insert type of employment contract? To me, that's a no-brainer. if you're a business leader, you should want to work with the best talent, the best skilled. I don't care whether or not they're sitting on my balance sheet, they're 1099 W-2 in the US. Like that shouldn't really matter. I should care about the quality of work. I'm telling you guys, more than 50% of the people were like, I want to work with a full-time employee. And so those are the same companies who are like, I want to return to office. We're not necessarily embracing generative AI. And so you just see within this data, these two like crossroads emerging within the data of people who are choosing this path of remote work, freelance, platform, gigs, just really thinking about work itself differently. And those who are really doubling down on what we've known. And our big research that we're launching this summer is to figure out, is there a financial performance difference between these two companies? Because if we can't, as researchers, help leaders realize that there is financial gain to be had working a new way of working, I just feel like we're hitting our head against the wall. And the fact that we're still like, can remote work all these years later, it's just like, are you kidding me? And so I want to get out of this carousel conversation and start focusing on other conversations.
Like, how can we make it better instead of can it be done?
Yes.
Listen, viewers and listeners, if you're hearing Dr. Monahan, okay, don't be like Kodak. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Don't be like Kodak. Kodak, you were sitting fat, son. Y'all should have been on that digital camera shit a long time ago. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Don't be like Kodak. Innovate. Don't stagnate. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, I just pulled my own Gary Cochran right there. But anyway, Rick, it's that time, sir.
Is it? Oh, my goodness.
Time.
Wow.
Ooh,
it is the time of the show where we get to ask you about a comical or inspiring moment that you have had while working remotely.
There are quite a few embarrassing stories. So I was trying to think out which one to share for this episode. Okay. But I may even share two. We'll see. You guys can figure out what you want to go with.
We got time.
We got time.
There are no rules.
So the first one was, this is pre-pandemic. Okay. So right when remote work was like on the outskirts, and one of my best friends had just started a remote work job. And so it was like right around lunchtime, and she said, do you want to come over? Again, it's like embarrassing of itself. Here we are as grown-ass adults. She said, do you want to come over and play a round of Mario Kart on lunch break? And I was like, sure, that sounds fun. Let me come on over, right? Like, why not?
Who wouldn't say no? Okay.
So,
I mean, yeah.
Right. I was like, cool. I'll be right over. So, playing the Mario Kart game, and she's like, shit, I got to dial into a work call. There's a conference call, but don't worry. It's like one of those calls. I don't have to be on video. I'm going to just dial in, go on mute. They won't even know I'm here. And I'm like, okay, do your thing. Like, just make sure you're on mute. You're going to do this.
Okay.
Meanwhile, we're like Rainbow Road, hardest thing, falling off the track. And she starts shouting at the TV, like, get the gold coins, get the purple turtle shell, or whatever it is, the blue turtle shell, to get the guy out front, get the blue turtle shell. All of a sudden we hear from the phone, excuse me, is everything okay? Are you in trouble?
Are you in trouble?
Are you safe?
Are you safe? What is the blue turtle shell you're speaking of? How many mushrooms
we don't know who
did
Luigi
you eat?
is, but we're very concerned about his well-being.
right. How many mushrooms did you eat? And why are you tripping on work hours? I don't get it.
So I think that is unfortunate. What makes remote work with a bad reputation are those kind of stories where the person's goofing off in the background and not paying attention. So that's
quality. That's quality.
Yeah.
What's the other one? You got it. You got another one?
So I got one more for you. This was during pandemic. I was living in Philly at the time. Had a downstairs office. Doors closed, so like when Kelly was in work zone, and I was actually doing a podcast recording with the New York Times with our, at the time, MIT, pretty big deal, at the time, the CHRO of Accenture. And so pretty like jazzed with the opportunity. We're releasing new research to talk about it.
Your hair is did.
Your hair's did. I'm
yes,
like, I don't know if there's going to be video for this, but like I'm bringing my A game, which, that takes a lot for me to bring my A game. Okay, because I'd rather show up in a Nike Fit outfit. I mean, even today, I feel like I need like a B game for this. And so I am like in the zone, like really, let's be honest, like sweating because I'm so nervous for this opportunity. I was like, oh my God, mom and dad, I'm in the New York Times. And I don't know what happened, but my partner came down and just opens the doors, like forgetting I'm in the middle of this with a Subway sandwich, just chomping in the background, being nosy. And I was like, are you shitting me right now? Like, exactly.
What's going on, hun? What you up to?
Wait.
Hey, I got a free meatball. I knew the guy working at Subway. You want one?
Is that podcast still going on? Exactly. Oh my God. So I was like, guys, I don't know how good you can edit that, but let's edit that scene out. And they're like, you should have had a background up. So still haven't learned my lesson, but you know.
These are the stories we live for, and that's most of the reason why we created this podcast.
That makes me so happy. Those stories
Oh,
are
yeah.
awesome. Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah. So for those of you, don't be playing Mario Kart while you're working.
No Mario Kart.
Oh, awesome.
Maybe a lock on the door.
Yeah.
Lock the door. I locked mine. I locked my door. I was
Make
like,
sure your mute button is activated.
Exactly.
yes, mute button has to be ready.
All right. These are just things we can teach the younger generation our ways. Learn from our mistakes.
That's right.
Do it right.
That's right. Yeah. Dr. Kelly Monahan, you have been an absolute sport. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can our listeners find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn probably is where you can find me the most. And then this fall, we're launching an Upwork Research Institute website. And so I'll be hosting, whether it's LinkedIn live events and podcasts, and we'll be sharing a lot of the research there as well.
Really awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, I hope that our paths cross because I might start drinking beer again just to hang out with you.
Well, I can't wait. Let me know. Anytime you're in Orlando, I'll be game.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Talk to you later. Peace.
Take care. You've been listening to Remotely One. Visit us at remotely1.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.